King Charles has just asked Camilla to leave Birmingham Palace and never return again after their divorce was finally completed this morning by a judge. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The day began like any other in the sprawling city of Birmingham, but inside the palace walls, a storm was quietly gathering. The sun rose over the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured gardens, but no light could soften the weight pressing down on Charles's shoulders. He had spent the early hours in solitary reflection, pacing through halls lined with portraits of ancestors who had shaped centuries of history. Each painted gaze seemed to silently question his choices, as if the very spirits of the monarchy were weighing in on the decision he now faced. Today marked the culmination of months of legal proceedings, endless consultations with advisors, and private emotional reckoning. The divorce had been finalized that morning by a judge, confirming what both parties had anticipated yet dreaded. Their marriage, once a symbol of endurance and public fascination, was officially over. The documents themselves were clinical, composed of legal terminology and neutral phrasing. But the reality behind the words was anything but neutral. The ruling carried the weight of finality, an unmistakable decree that their lives, once entwined, would now diverge irreversibly. Camilla had been summoned to Charles's private study, a room heavy with history and the quiet hum of ancestral authority. She entered with measured composure, her expression a mask of calm, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. For decades she had navigated the intricacies of royal life, balancing public scrutiny, private expectations, and her own desires. Yet nothing in her years of experience could prepare her for the directive she was about to receive. Charles would ask her to leave Birmingham Palace and to never return. The simplicity of the instruction belied its emotional magnitude. The staff, ever discreet but deeply attuned to the rhythms of the palace, moved silently, aware that history was unfolding before them. Whispers echoed along the corridors, each hushed comment a testament to the gravity of the situation. No preparation, no protocol could contain the raw human emotion that permeated the space. The palace, a structure built to project power and permanence, now felt fragile, its vast halls echoing with the quiet tremors of personal upheaval. Charles's voice, when he finally spoke, was steady but laden with emotion. The words themselves were direct. Camilla must leave immediately, and she must never return. Each syllable was carefully measured, a reflection of the weight of responsibility that came with kingship. Even as he conveyed the instruction, a part of him recoiled, aware of the emotional blow he was delivering to someone who had been his closest confidant. The juxtaposition of duty and personal sorrow created a tension that was almost tangible, wrapping around the room like a dense fog. Camilla's reaction was equally complex. Though she maintained outward composure, the subtle tremor in her hands and the slight narrowing of her eyes revealed the internal conflict. She had known this day was coming, but anticipation had done little to soften the impact. Each object she touched, photographs, mementos, personal items, seemed to anchor her to a life now receding into memory. The act of packing became ritualistic, a symbolic acknowledgement that her place in the palace and in Charles's life was ending. The emotional resonance of the moment extended beyond the two central figures. Observers within the palace, from long Irving staff to recently appointed aides, felt the weight of the moment. For many, this was more than a personal dispute. It was a historic fracture, a reminder that even within the most hallowed institutions, personal decisions can reshape legacies. Every careful glance, every quiet step, was a recognition of participating in a story that would be recounted for generations. Outside, the media was already aware that something extraordinary was taking place. Reporters and photographers had gathered near the gates, sensing the potential for a moment that could dominate headlines worldwide. They did not yet know the full extent of the personal drama within, but instinctively they recognized that the palace's usual rhythms had been interrupted. The air of anticipation was electric, and social media channels were already alive with speculation. As Camilla moved through the palace, Her departure became both literal and symbolic. Each room she passed, once shared spaces of laughter, conversation, and quiet intimacy, now felt imbued with absence. The very architecture of the palace, designed to convey stability and grandeur, seemed to reflect the internal fractures of its inhabitants. The polished floors echoed with every step, a reminder that history was being made, not in the public eye, but in these private corridors where decisions would ripple outward for years to come. Charles remained in the grand hall, absorbing the silence left behind. The act of asking someone to leave, particularly someone with whom he had shared decades, was profoundly isolating. He considered the implications not only for himself, but for the monarchy and the public. Every action he took was scrutinized, every word interpreted, yet in that private moment he was simply a man grappling with the intersection of duty and loss, power and vulnerability. Questions swirled around the palace like an unseen current. How could the personal intersect so dramatically with the public? What did it mean for a monarch to sever a relationship so publicly and definitively? And most importantly, how would this moment define the next chapter of both their lives? These questions did not require immediate answers. Their weight was carried silently in the actions and expressions of those present, a quiet testament to the profound human cost of decisions made at the intersection of power and intimacy. The hours that followed were filled with a mix of quiet reflection and the ongoing mechanics of palace life. Staff continued their duties with a newfound gravity, aware that every action was now part of a larger narrative. The media buzzed outside, seeking glimpses of a story they could not fully access, while the public speculated endlessly about the implications. Yet within the walls, the drama was raw and intimate, a stark reminder that history is often made in moments unseen by the world. By midday, Camilla had departed, leaving behind not only a physical space, but an emotional imprint that would linger in the palace for years. Charles, alone with the echoes of his decision, contemplated the intersection of love, duty, and history. The legal end of a marriage was one thing, but the emotional and symbolic consequences were far more complex. He knew that the story was far from over. The public reaction, the scrutiny of the media, and the internal dynamics of the royal family would continue to unfold in ways he could neither predict nor control. This morning, Birmingham Palace had witnessed more than a legal proceeding. It had seen the unraveling of decades of shared life, the intersection of personal grief and public responsibility, and the stark demonstration that even those at the pinnacle of power are not immune to heartbreak. The events of these hours would resonate not only within the palace but across the world, shaping perceptions, igniting debate, and challenging assumptions about the monarchy, love, and human resilience. The story of Charles and Camilla's marriage had always been complicated, a delicate dance between love, duty, and relentless public scrutiny. Long before the legal papers were signed and the palace gates bore witness to the final act of separation, their relationship had been under siege by history, by tradition, and by the ever-watchful eyes of the public. Understanding the depth of the turmoil requires stepping back decades to a time when their bond was born in secrecy, nurtured in whispers, and sustained by a combination of genuine affection and shared resilience. Charles had been under intense media attention since his youth. Every romantic choice he made, every personal misstep was magnified, dissected, and broadcast. Camilla entered his life amidst these pressures, a figure who would ultimately be both a source of comfort and a lightning rod for criticism. Their connection, forged in private moments away from cameras and headlines, was intense, often passionate, and occasionally fraught with doubt. But it was also real, a reality that would challenge the rigid protocols and expectations imposed by the monarchy. Even in the earliest years, the tension between personal happiness and public duty was evident. Charles had been married previously, and the public adoration for the fairy tale narrative of royalty clashed with the private realities of his life. Camilla, though supportive, was often portrayed in starkly negative terms by media outlets eager for scandal. Rumors, leaks, and persistent scrutiny created an environment where their personal decisions were never private, and where every interaction could be politicized. The marriage that eventually formed between them, had to navigate this minefield, balancing love against legacy. For decades, their relationship existed in the shadows. Social events, official duties, and public appearances were carefully choreographed to maintain the veneer of normalcy. But behind closed doors, their bond grew, strengthened by shared understanding and mutual resilience. Yet this closeness also brought challenges. Every moment of intimacy was shadowed by questions. How would the public react if they knew the truth? Could they maintain authenticity while preserving appearances? Was there a way to reconcile personal fulfillment with the obligations of royalty? These were not theoretical questions. They were daily pressing realities that shaped every decision. The challenges were compounded by the nature of royal life itself. The monarchy, steeped in tradition and ritual, demands loyalty not only to a spouse, but to the institution itself. Every choice carries consequence. Every misstep reverberates through history. For Charles and Camilla, this meant living a dual existence, private intimacy and public restraint, an exhausting, balancing act that left little room for personal comfort or error. Over time, the strain accumulated, creating a silent tension that only those closest to the couple could perceive. Public perception, often shaped by media narratives rather than reality, further complicated the relationship. Camilla, for example, was frequently cast in a negative light, unfairly burdened with the blame for past controversies, while Charles's own actions were scrutinized through the lens of his position. These portrayals created not only external pressure, but internal conflict. How could one maintain dignity and authenticity in a world where every gesture, every word, every expression was open to judgment? The psychological toll was immense, contributing to the eventual fraying of their marital bond. Yet amidst the turmoil, there were moments of undeniable connection. Shared jokes, quiet confidences, and mutual support offered glimpses of the love that had drawn them together in the first place. Friends and insiders often remarked on the rare tenderness between them, a recognition that for all its complications, their relationship was rooted in genuine human emotion. These moments were fragile and fleeting, but they underscored the complexity of a marriage constantly tested by external forces. Throughout the years, advisors and palace officials attempted to mediate, offering guidance on navigating the challenges of royal life. Some interventions were effective, others only highlighted the growing divide. Even well-intentioned advice sometimes backfired, creating additional tension or sowing mistrust. For Charles and Camilla, the delicate equilibrium of love and duty required constant vigilance. Yet it became increasingly apparent that the pressures of life in the public eye could not be entirely mitigated. By the time the divorce proceedings began, the relationship had been tested in ways that few could comprehend. Legal battles, public speculation, and internal palace politics converged, creating a maelstrom of stress and uncertainty. Even after decades together, the couple faced a situation that was both inevitable and painful: the formal acknowledgement that their marriage could not survive the relentless pressures surrounding it. The court's ruling that morning was not the first challenge they had faced, but it was the one that could not be postponed, negotiated, or softened. In retrospect, the signs had been there for years. The subtle coolness in conversations, the careful distance maintained in public, the quiet but unmistakable signs of tension in private quarters, all pointed to the gradual erosion of what had once been a robust connection. Friends, aides, and advisors had noted changes in behavior, shifts in tone, and moments of unspoken strain. These were not failures of love, but rather the consequences of living a life under constant observation, where personal authenticity was often subordinated to duty, perception, and legacy. This chapter of their lives is crucial to understanding the weight of the mourning at Birmingham Palace. The divorce was not merely a legal formality. It was the culmination of decades of pressure, sacrifice, and emotional labor. The separation was a testament to the impossibility of reconciling private desires with public expectations, a story that resonates not only within the palace walls, but with anyone who has ever faced impossible choices between personal fulfillment and external obligations. As the world would soon see, the end of their marriage was a moment that combined heartbreak, dignity, and consequence. It reflected the complex reality of love in the shadow of history, of personal connection constrained by public responsibility. And while the court had issued its final decree, the emotional narrative, the personal grief, the longing, the regret, and the resilience would continue to unfold, shaping both the present and future in ways that no legal document could fully capture. The legal proceedings that culminated in the finalization of Charles and Camilla's divorce had been months in the making, but the atmosphere that morning carried the weight of years. Legal experts, advisors, and palace officials had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, navigating a labyrinth of precedent, royal protocol, and public scrutiny. The courtroom drama, though largely unseen by the public, was intense, high stakes, and deeply personal, reflecting not only the dissolution of a marriage, but the complexities of separating private lives from public responsibilities. From the outset, the divorce had been framed as an inevitable but painful necessity. Legal teams for both parties meticulously reviewed every detail: financial arrangements, property rights, public duties, and even the subtle implications of media exposure. For a marriage inshed in centuries of tradition and public attention, no element could be left unexamined. Every clause in the legal documents carried weight, potentially affecting public perception, the monarchy's image, and even the emotional well-being of those involved. The court itself became a stage of silent tension. Behind its imposing doors, discussions were held in hushed tones, arguments carefully constructed, and evidence presented with precision. Lawyers representing the monarchy faced unique challenges. Unlike ordinary divorces, where private matters remain largely secluded, the scrutiny here was relentless. Every motion, every stipulation was analyzed not only for legal validity, but for how it might be perceived in the court of public opinion. Advisors knew that missteps could have far-reaching consequences, potentially fueling speculation, scandal, and criticism on a global scale. Central to the proceedings were questions of property and residence, particularly concerning the palaces and estates tied to Charles's role as monarch. Birmingham Palace, a residence steeped in history and significance, was at the heart of the negotiations. Its symbolic and practical importance made the question of who would occupy it permanently or temporarily highly contentious. Legal representatives presented arguments with the utmost care, weighing not only the letter of the law, but the emotional and psychological implications of each decision. Camilla's legal team, meanwhile, worked to secure her rights and dignity in the process. Though the outcome was largely anticipated, the negotiation required delicacy, precision, and a keen understanding of the personal stakes involved. It was not merely about material possessions or official titles. It was about the recognition of her years of partnership, her role within the monarchy, and the acknowledgement of her personal sacrifices. Every phrase in the documents was scrutinized, every precedent considered, and every potential misinterpretation guarded against. Throughout the process, Charles himself remained deeply involved. Though the legal machinery operated through advisors and solicitors, the personal weight of each decision fell squarely on his shoulders. He reviewed drafts, considered implications, and reflected on the long-term consequences of each clause. For a man who had spent a lifetime balancing duty with personal longing, the legal storm was both a procedural necessity and an emotional crucible. The courtroom, though not a place of public spectacle in this instance, was nonetheless an arena of profound consequence. The judge, aware of the historical significance of the case, approached the proceedings with measured precision. Every decision, every ruling was framed to maintain the dignity of the monarchy while enforcing the law fairly. The ruling that morning was the culmination of careful deliberation, balancing competing interests, and ensuring that the legal outcome respected both the rights of the individuals involved and the broader implications for the royal institution. When the final signature was made, it carried not just legal weight, but symbolic resonance, the official end of a marriage that had been both intensely private and deeply public. Emotional undercurrents ran beneath every legal argument. Advisors noted moments of hesitation, subtle shifts in tone, and the visible strain on both Charles and Camilla. Though decorum was maintained, the human reality of the proceedings was palpable. Even as the law was executed with precision, it was impossible to separate the decisions from the decades of shared history, the private triumphs and heartbreaks, and the personal consequences that would follow. Beyond the courtroom, the ripple effects were immediate. Media outlets, though largely barred from observing the proceedings directly, speculated on the outcome, drawing from insider reports and carefully cultivated sources. The public, ever hungry for details, was already forming narratives, analyzing previous statements, and anticipating the ramifications. In this way, the legal storm extended far beyond the confines of the palace and the court, touching the lives of countless observers and shaping the story that would dominate headlines in the days to come. As the ruling was announced, Charles and Camilla faced the reality of the final decree. It was one thing to anticipate the outcome, another to confront it in the quiet moments following its issuance. The weight of legality was intertwined with the weight of history, emotion, and public expectation. Every decision made in the courtroom was a thread in a larger tapestry, a tapestry that would define how the world remembered this chapter of their lives. The legal storm was not merely a procedural hurdle. It was a profound test of character, resilience, and endurance. For Charles, it reinforced the tension between personal desires and public duty. For Camilla, it was an affirmation of dignity, a moment to assert her place in history with grace. For the palace and the monarchy, it represented the careful balancing act of enforcing law while maintaining the image of